In my previous video, I broke down the evolution of the frame from the Renaissance court dances all the way through the 1930s. So if you missed that, I will put a link in the description below. And let's continue with our coverage of the evolution of the frame in ballroom dance, okay? So in the 1940s, the frame starts to resemble what it looks like today. The elbows are not up quite yet. They're still, I would say, 15 degrees dropped. And just the way, because the lady's shorter, our arms are on top, the lady's even more dropped. And if you were to see photos from behind at this stage of the game in history for ballroom, it would look something like, hopefully you can see here. I don't think it's very aesthetically pleasing. I'm just showing you kind of the steps that we went through to get where we are today. Okay, and I'm gonna share a photo with you of some world champions, world professional ballroom champions, Charles Thibault and Vera Behan from the 1940s, so you get a peek at what I'm talking about. But you will see the legs are quite upright, which forces a very upright connection, so very little shape. You really, other than if they were doing like an over sway where they're doing a lot of literally metronomic swing, hardly any pendulum swing. So that results in very little shaping and certainly no breathing in the frame, just very upright, rigid, and dancing around. And let me show you a picture of that. I'll be right back, okay? So here is Charles and Vera. So when I see dancing from the 40s, I think it looks somewhat like a decent social dancer today. Certainly these people, would not make a single callback this day and age at the championship level, but you know what? Dance sport is just like ice skating. Like if you think of, like an old school skater like Sonja Henning, I think, they would have never done a quadruple Lutz, so things evolve with time. They become more athletic. Really any sport does. And dance is no different. Okay, let's move on. We're rolling into the 1950s. And guys, you might get a kick out of the costumes in these photos too. I sure do. At this point, we are getting more and more offset with the partner. So as you saw kind of in the 1910s, 1920s, we actually were literally kind of across each other, and then it shifted to about here in the 20s, here in the 30s, here in the 40s. So each decade, we are getting more and more and more and more offset where we are in each other's right arm, so to speak, instead of straight ahead. This allows us to get much better rotation and a rotational three-dimensional movement, and so what looks to be like a much wider frame. Obviously, our arms are not growing like orangutans, but the space definitely is. And it helps when we put those elbows up higher and higher. Obviously, this is going to give you a wider frame than back in the Renaissance court dances where they were straight out front, or likewise when they transitioned to straight to the side and down. That's still smaller than out and wide. So now whenever we go to the floor, even it doesn't matter, ballroom or Latin, we're trying to take up as much space as we can in the room. Was not always the case. And you will see that from this picture from the 1950s. We're going to look at professional world ballroom champions Sonny Binnick. I think he's dancing with Sonia Brock here. It might be Joyce Hayways. Old school pros on here. We have a number of professional dancers on our site. If you recognize who this gal is from the picture, I'm not sure which one it is, go ahead and comment below, but it's either Sally or Joyce. Okay, so here you go. This is professional world champions and what they looked like in the 1950s. Here you go. So as you can see, there is a slightly more lowered connection, certainly not like it is today. But as we saw in the last video, 1940s, where it was darn near straight legs, they are becoming more bent, which allows them to connect to the partner a little closer. And hence we can get a little bit of a wider shape. The lower in the knees you can get, the wider that top line is going to end up being, the wider that frame is going to be. Okay, guys, let's transition now, rolling into the 1960s. Okay, so the frame gets quite upright here, and there's a bit of a dramatic shift in this decade where we get a very strong waist connection. This is, you would never see this today, but it definitely was part of the evolution of, I'll say, like the acacia tree top line instead of the conifer, like Doug fir tree top line, so that flowering out shape. And kind of in that day and age, of course I'm oversimplifying for the case of making a 10-minute video, but the shape was very much from the waist out. And during the 60s, it was more, the man is upright or even slightly pitched forward and the follow is out. So I'm going to show you what that looks like in action. Okay, guys, so we're going to look at, couple 1960s and kind of what championship level dancing looked like in that decade. Here you go. And I think that picture makes it very clear. There is very tall legs, not a ton of connection in the knees, tons of connection in the waist, and the lead is dead upright, sometimes even pitched forward into her still. Now, it is certainly not like the 1920s where we're literally into each other, but certainly exponentially more than we are in this day and age, where it's more like as a follow, I'm trying to play to this side of the room, and as the lead's trying to play to this side of the room, it's more of an insular energy. Okay, guys, now we're transitioning to the 1970s. Okay, so we're going to look at Anthony Hurley and Fay Saxton, professional world champions. This was during the 1970s. And you'll notice in each decade, it's getting a little closer to where we connect today. So the connection does move slightly up from almost on top of the pelvis bending back to more of the tummy bending back. So it is a little bit of a softer end result, looks like more like we do today. And each of these decades, his right arm is slowly coming more forward. Now, it's not where it is today, where it's darn near a frontal position, but it's certainly not side like it used to be in these previous decades. So, and the elbows continue to rise up each decade. Now, in the 70s, they're pretty consistent with the 60s, so they're not as high as they were today, but let me show you what that dancing looks like with the world champions, professional ballroom champions, and this is from the 1970s. So again, tummy connection. And fortunately, finally in the 70s, the man's head positions moves from being forward ahead of the sternum to actually on the sternum. Now, this day and age, it's even more so where the sternum juts out and the head is upright. But I can tell you as a follow, it's certainly more comfortable for me, even if he's just dead upright like he is in the 70s, than if he's pitched forward. And all the decades preceding that, the man was either entirely pitched forward or even his head was just pitched forward. But because the lead tends to be taller and stronger than me, this can feel a little bit overwhelming, and I certainly don't feel like I have the freedom to shape and fill out that frame if I'm afraid I'm gonna pull on him. So I love that in the 70s. We finally get him and what I call his slice of the pizza. My slice, lead slice, not the same slice. Okay, guys, now we are transitioning to the 1980s. And this is where, in my opinion, the dancing really takes a step up in terms of the speed, the light and shade, it starts looking like, you know what, they actually do look like competitors. Again, they wouldn't make a single, you know, callback at Blackpool today, but they would look better than anyone showing up to a social dance. So in this case, I'm going to show you Michael and Vicki Barr. They were professional champions, world champions in ballroom in the 1980s. And you'll see, once again, in this decade, the man's head, the lead's head, is even farther back. It's no longer upright. It's getting farther and farther back. And when the lead gets farther back, as follow, I can counterbalance. And we end up with this more three-dimensional frame instead of this two-dimensional frame. Actually, in the olden days, it was like a one-dimensional frame. Then it was a flat two-dimensional frame. And now we're moving into the three-dimensional frame where we're taking up more of a circular movement, almost like a cowboy and a lasso instead of just a piece of paper with a flat frame. So let me show you Michael and Vicki. So again, these are world professional champions from the 1980s. So again, that was dancing elite level in the 1980s. Friends, I am hitting that 10-minute mark again, and I don't want to rush through because I have so much fun stuff to share, and we've got a few more decades to go through. So I am going to follow up, not tomorrow, but I promise you I'm going to follow up very, very soon to follow up through what the frame looks like today. I hope you found that to be interesting. If you're into all things ballroom dance, hey, you're in the right spot. We hit new topics each day. And I look forward to seeing you first thing in the morning. Have a wonderful, happy ballroom dancing day. Toodles!